one of my favorite stories is somebody was emailing for support, and it was just me at the time, and I was trying to support them, and they were like, "I need to talk to somebody more technical on your team." And I like wrote back. I was like, because I had CEO on my email, but I was like, "I'm sorry, you don't understand. Like, I wrote the whole thing. Like, this is all of my doing. Like, you're talking to the right person. I guarantee it."
And we are live. All right. So, welcome to another episode of SourceLife. And today we have Joel Griffith. Joel is the CEO and founder of Browserless. And we also have Tomer Barnea, the CEO and co founder of Novo. And hi, Tomer and Joel. How you guys doing?
Hey, how's it going? Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, happy to be here for another episode and happy to have you with us, Joel.
Joel, I would love, before we will kind of go deep in the conversation that we're going to have, if you maybe could just introduce yourself a bit briefly and also share something maybe funny, maybe something kind of surprising about yourself and about your life.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, obviously Joel, like you mentioned, founder and
Nice.
CEO of Browserless.io, was a software engineer for a long time. And Browserless came about from just fighting with tools and other things with headless browsers. And that's kind of the genesis of where that project came from. But before I was a software engineer, before all those computery days, I was actually a jazz trumpet player for about 10 years and toured in the United States and played for a long time. That was like my quote unquote first love. So yeah, music's definitely my passion project. And it's just a funny observation because I feel like most engineers, programmers I've ever worked with are like artists on the side, painters, do something. And
That's so cool. I mean,
yeah,
I
it's
have
like
no
they
idea
have
how I
something,
could
you have to do
find out
something with
about
your
it,
hands
but
that isn't a keyboard,
well,
whether
at
it's
least
a
we know
painting
that.
stick or a
And
mixing,
and yeah,
rod or
Tomer kind
whatever. And
of briefly
so,
throw it
yeah,
there,
there's like this
but
creative
Tomer is
side of
also
most
a proud
engineers that
baker.
they need to have some output that isn't a
So
computer. But
yeah,
um,
it's really
yeah,
cool
that's
thing to
a
do
little
with your
little
hands, and
lesser known
so
fact
cool.
about me.
So going to our kind of topic of today, Tomer and Dima, our co-founders and of Novo, have bootstrapped their previous companies. And when our producer Nevo told Tomer that you are a single founder and bootstrapping an open source company, he was a bit shocked. So happy to know how you started Browserless. I mean, where it come from?
Yeah, I mean, so originally it wasn't Browserless. It was like a wish list app for like friends and family. Like every like birthday, Christmas holiday season, it was always like a struggle. Like, hey, it's our son's birthday. We need to get a list of all the stuff he wants for his birthday out there and whatever. And so I was like, oh, I'll do it because it's not just Amazon or other big e-tailers. And so like I was working on a little app to do all of the things that they wanted. And I ran into a single page app. It was, I think, Target at the time. And so the little UI that I had couldn't load up like the page and the pricing and images and all of that. And I was like, man, headless Chrome is a thing. Like this was quite a few years ago. And so Chrome came out with like headless first class support back then. And so I wanted something to use headless Chrome. Wrote a library because Puppeteer wasn't around, nor was Playwright at the time. And then those libraries came out, and I was like, I still had troubles with headless Chrome, just even like running it, scaling it. Like writing the library and stuff was, tough, but it wasn't the hardest part. It was like operationalizing everything and getting that working. Um, and so I switched at one point because I was like, this is such a hard problem. I'm spending most of my time on this and not on the app. There was nothing at the time I could find that fulfilled this need that I needed, like fine grain, like programmatic control of a browser. And it wasn't like a Selenium thing where it was testing related. And so I was like, maybe I'll just pivot at this point because I think this is a bigger opportunity that we're missing out in the developer space. So, yeah, that's kind of how it came about. Um, Again, been an engineer for a long time up until that point. So like I had worked with like Selenium and Grid and like weird Jenkins, Frankenstein monsters that people have put together. The thing felt like first class supported well, and like had conventions for how to do things, and you know all of the like bells and whistles you'd expect. So yeah, that's kind of how things got started.
Something that kind of catched me when you presented how the idea of browserless came to life is that it was some kind of side project that you did like on the side, like just to solve a tiny thing. I don't know, just to build something useful. Was it your first attempt or first kind of initiative to do something like that?
No, it definitely wasn't. This is something that I feel pretty passionate about too, telling more people. I think you read on Twitter and all these other, social mediums that, oh, I just launched such product, and then it just takes off and they get all these like, funding opportunities, and they get all these signups, and like, man, that is just not the case. Hardly ever. You're seeing an anomaly, and yeah, it's very rare for something like that to happen. But then you get, as people like ourselves are trying to like start something or build something, you see that all the time, and you're like, well, there's no opportunity here, like because it didn't happen like what happened with that person. And you know, in the news and the media, like you see all of the statistical anomalies, the ones that are outliers, and that's why it's newsworthy, right? Like that doesn't happen to everybody every day. That's why they show up there, is because it's rare. Um, and so, anyways, I'll get off my soapbox, so to speak, for there. But yeah, that it wasn't my first attempt. This was like number 4 or 5 of a series of failures. So
Wow, all right. By the way, how long it took until you realized that there is actually a space and opportunity for an actual company here?
yeah, that's a great question. Like I had suspicions at first, and this is where like the good like, growth hacking. This is another thing that kind of rubs a lot of people the wrong way in open source. Is you do need to sort of like go out, and people listening, you've probably heard like go to Quora, go to Stack Overflow. I guess it depends on where your product audience is, but for me it was GitHub issues. Like Puppeteer came out, and I remember at one point I sorted by the most like commented or reacted issues, and it was like, how do I run this in Ubuntu? Because somebody was trying to do it in production, right? Like they wanted to use Puppeteer and they wanted to use it on a cloud environment, which is going to be a Linux machine that doesn't have a display and doesn't have all these packages you need installed for Puppeteer to work. And so I used, issues threads like that, was talking to people, and actually they're probably still out there because, even if you close it, it's still public. But, and so I was just pushing it, in a way there. I would answer people's questions by all means, like, oh, you're missing this package, this will get it to work. But if you don't want to worry about this problem at all, like go check out Browserless. And then, yeah, you got to start a spark somehow, without ruffling too many feathers. So that was, I started doing that, and then I got a few like cold emails from potential users like, hey, we're interested in doing something. Here's what we're trying to do. And then that was like a good signal. Yeah, that's a really strong, like if people are coming to you out of nowhere or asking for help, like there's a pretty good chance that you're onto something, and that you should probably pursue it, seriously at that point.
I think that one of the tipping point, at least for Novo, was when the repository got trending on GitHub. And I kind of was just wondering if something like that happened to Browserless.io.
Yeah. So there's been a few things. Trending on GitHub was one of them. That was a huge signal for us. I feel like it was probably about a year into it that actually happened. Um, and I can't remember the event around it. There was like a hackathon going on someplace. I think it was like in Japan. I'm like, I have no presence in Japan whatsoever, full stop. And then I woke up, one day to Twitter and just, searched for Browserless, and I just saw all these tweets about it. at some like conference that was going on, and it was like a tool that somebody recommended, and then it got us on, trending. That's the nice thing about like front page on HN or whatever, is like you hit all these other like things that you'll get front page on at the same time. So like if you're trending on GitHub, there's a good chance that you're going to get picked up on Twitter from all these different feeds, and it just like spins and spins and spins and just keeps growing, from that. Yeah, that was a pretty surreal moment, like waking up and like seeing like my name Browserless, and like above me is like a Facebook library, and below me is like Microsoft, and that's a pretty awesome moment. Yeah, as an aside, there's like a little habit I have of anytime something like really cool like that happens, like I have it in like a Dropbox folder that's just wins, and I just take screenshots of that stuff, because on the days when like things aren't going well or going bad, you can like go through and look at all these screenshots, like, okay, like, that yes, things are going well, like overall. So I'll just throw that in there as a suggestion to people that are doing this. Like, keep a catalog of the things that have gone well, because you'll come back to those a lot. So, but yeah.
I think I'd like to take two main things here. First of all, and that's kind of it might be a generic statement, but I think you're spot on. Specifically for founders, it's such a bad emotional roller coaster. You have those. Yeah, I would even say you have those great days and then bad days, but it actually could be you have great hours and then bad hours in the same day. It doesn't even necessarily have to move a day. So take the time and really cherish those moments where you do see something works out nicely. It might be trending somewhere, and just keep it to yourself or advocate it into a team, especially if you do have some team around you. Some of them might take it not as well as you do. Some take it better, worse, whatever. But you do need to remember that what you're doing is working, and kind of keep that for you when you have those bad moments, because otherwise it could really easily pull you down, and you really don't want that. And that actually kind of takes me to another place I'm not going to open right now, but that's about having another co-founder next to you. Uh, um, but okay, maybe
Actually,
we'll start
we
there
can
because
tap
it
into
is
that.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that we started in the beginning, um, the fact that Tomer was a bit shocked, at least when he heard about you, is the fact that you are a single founder, which is kind of it's not that common. I think. I mean, I'm not really an expert. I can't really say that, but at least I think it's not that common. And how? Okay, it's uncommon officially, right? So, how did you dealt with that? And do you regret doing it by yourself?
I mean, well, thank you for that. That is like, yeah, one of the hardest parts is being by yourself. I mean, for both the good and the bad moments, like when things are going great, you're looking around for somebody to celebrate with, and it's like, oh, it's just me in this ship of misery. Yeah. But then the bad moment, yeah, the bad when things are bad, it is like it really compounds just how bad it can be, because it's only you that has to dig yourself out of a hole or whatever. Yeah, I think the regrets I have are mostly like on, again, like the skill sets that I didn't have. So like, I'm based out of the United States, so a lot of it is you can start a business in any state you want, and there's like pros and cons to doing each one, but there's 50 states. So how do you pick the one to start the business in? And so there's all these like questions that I would just linger on for days at a time, because I just didn't know. And, read a lot of articles and tried to like talk to people that I knew. I guess that was probably ultimately what happened, was I was backfilling the lack of a founder by just like beating around my network of friends and people that had done similar. It's like, hey, I'm thinking about doing X, Y, and Z. Is this a bad idea? Or is this a good idea, and why? And yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, like I was obviously the biggest bottleneck, and now I have partners, just because you can only scale yourself up so far. I mean, like, again, being an engineer, like you think, oh, I'll automate this, like there's just certain things you can't fundamentally automate. Like support's a great one. Like you can probably get pretty close to, with good docs and everything else, but people need to talk to people. And at the end of the day, even if it's a developer business, it's still a people business. Like, engineers need to talk to engineers. You need to have FaceTime with people, especially in the sales cycles. Like, if you never show up for sales calls, like, you're a ghost. Like, nobody knows who you are. There's no face to the business. That's probably the most shocking thing I've learned in doing all this is like, wow, this is still a very personal, even though everybody's remote, we want to see people and talk to them. And like, no, okay, if something goes bad, I can talk to Joel at Browserless because he seems to have his head on straight from as far as I can tell. But yeah, I mean, it was definitely lonely those first 4 or 5 years. Like, yeah. I mean, again, I try to utilize that time. That's another lesson I feel like is, when things aren't going well or it's taking a lot of time, like, try to use some of that to your advantage. So, like, if I was stuck on one decision, like, I'll think about that. But while I'm doing that, I'll go do this remedial task and get that done with, or I'll write a couple cold emails while I'm still like letting things boil a little bit internally. So, but yeah, definitely don't recommend it. I don't think it's for everybody at all. Like, you have to be a special kind of crazy. And I guess, happen to be that sort of breed of insane to, do it for so long. But, yeah. And then you get not imposter syndrome. You get, what's that, Stockholm syndrome, where you think, oh, this is just normal. Everybody does this. And then once you have founders and you realize like, oh my gosh, what was I doing this entire time? Like, why didn't I find somebody else to help me out a long time ago?
Okay, so actually back to a bit talking about Browserless. I think did you had a moment when you needed to do a like crucial change in the product? It may be maybe with the persona you kind of targeting, or maybe anything else. I would love if you could maybe touch that slightly.
I think, yeah, there's been a couple. So, like, on the marketing side of things, like, there definitely was this, like, originally I knew the problem it could solve. Like, oh, if you're doing PDFs, if you're web scraping, if you're trying to like automate a system someplace else that doesn't have an API, like, you could use this to do that. And so, because of like all these use cases, there wasn't really a like good persona, like audience we could like, go after, because it's anywhere from like health industry, third party logistics, to people trying to like buy Supreme drops on Fridays. And so I really struggled for a long time. Yeah, like, how do you write copy for this, hammer that does it all? And so it took a long time for me to like find who the audience was. And then I eventually came to realize like everybody I talk to is technical. They're all developers. Like, I need to shift this from being like a generic tool that does stuff to like, this is a developer tool. This is a developer's best friend when it comes to this sort of a task. And so there was like, yeah, a time where it's like, redo the website, re-gear it towards being very like developer friendly, like, use all the terminology that I would use. And like, I would dumb stuff down a lot just because like I didn't know who my audience was. And I'm not sure if like ephemeral made sense to a business developer, but it makes sense to me as a developer. But then, having seen like all the people that have signed up and their like, titles or whatever, like, I was like, no, I should double down on that. I really should double down on, like, being very developer centric and using that, nomenclature well. So, yeah, obviously a lot more stuff that I broke over time, and changed, but that was a pretty big one. I remember is like making that pivot over to like, Mike Ballmer, the developers speech at Microsoft. There was that moment for me.
So it kind of relates to me to two main things. One, we can touch briefly, is OpenView partners have this document they gave for developer-led businesses, and for a lot of developer-led businesses, one or two of the founders, maybe more, are actually technical, right? Because in order to actually nail down developer tooling, the founders need to be developers. And one of the things they kind of saw is, when you become a founder and you look to create business opportunities from what you're doing, you a lot of time move into basically developers are great at replicating stuff, right? We can see patterns and then we can replicate them again and again and again. And so what ended up happening is those developers, founders, used to replicate a lot of sites they saw on the wild, so to speak. And so what they replicate business sites. But I mean, their users aren't really accustomed into buying like that, and they're not really good at talking like that. And so you become to the situation where a you're doing a really bad job talking to your users because it's not like they're talking, and they wouldn't buy like that, even if you were good at it. B, you're just not good at it because that's not how you talk, and so it's like a double whammy of losing here.
Yeah, it's crazy, like the amount of nuance that developers like, even like marketing now. Like I, I still have a hand in some of it, but I'm not an expert at it. But like the guy that does marketing for Browserless is like, hey, what do you think of this? I'm like, I wouldn't buy it because of these things, and it doesn't resonate to me as a developer. And so,
Exactly.
like, let me do a little wordsmithing and change a couple verbs, how it's presented, and it feels a lot more natural. But yeah, if you don't know that, if you don't come from that background or have your hands dirty in that kind of work, it just, I don't know, it misses the target altogether. So yeah, I could
Yeah.
definitely see that being a thing.
And that's kind of the first thing resonated to me. The second one, which is something we kind of face at Novo every single day right now, is the differentiation between product use cases and technical use cases, right? So, looking into a browserless, it's easy to say on a product use case, right? I mean, if you're doing a PDF creation from web, I'm perfect for you. Okay, I mean that's nice. That's a nice business use case. But I mean, as a developer, if you just as it is right now, web browser automation, okay, I know what you're doing. It's easy. I mean, I don't need a lot of help. It's very easy to see. And so when you're talking to developers, there's a lot of basically you have the quick gateway of saying, you know what, I don't really care right now about the product use cases because I know you're able to get what I'm saying because I'm talking technical language and you're a technical persona, so you're able to understand it quickly, and that gives the business the ability to grow faster and actually learn the business use cases, the product use cases, because the engineers come and they do what they need to do, and then say, "Oh, so you're like the 20 business doing the same thing? Okay, there's a thing here."
Yep. Yeah. It's funny because it's really jargon as like a measuring stick almost. Like, if you can, I don't know. I've always struggled with people that are like, or businesses that are like, oh, it's heavily Latin because it's medical or whatever. I'm like, why is everything in Latin? And well, it's like it's a way to like suss up how much do you know? Like, how long have you been doing this? Like, are you? I don't know. It's an interesting human behavior, like the amount of random words and what they mean in this specific context. If you know enough of them, you've won the bingo challenge and are thus past the first gate of vetting. But yeah, it's absolutely truth developers, like 100%. And uh, I kind of wish it wasn't a thing, but it sort of is. One of my favorite stories is somebody was emailing for support, and it was just me at the time, and I was trying to support them, and they were like, "I need to talk to somebody more technical on your team." And I like wrote back. I was like, because I had CEO on my email, but I was like, I'm sorry you don't understand. Like, I wrote the whole thing. Like, this is all of my doing. Like, you're talking to the right person. I guarantee it. I'm sorry if it's not going well, but you're talking to the best possible person. So let's continue. Uh, and gosh, I feel like I know the CEO title especially is one that I'm like, I kind of hate to a degree. It is. It really is. Like anytime you show up for like a eng call or whatever. I mean, like we have people browserless now that do support, and so I don't make all of them, but I make more than half of them. And anytime they see a CEO show up, it does change the course of the conversation pretty significantly. And it's like I wish there was a better way to like classify what what I am or what we are, because it's more than it's like a chief anything officer. Like I'll do anything that needs to be done, engineering, ops. Like the CEO just doesn't get through, at this level.
So I think we kind of got warmed up to the next thing that I think I wanted to find out, and it's about the fact that after some time and a lot of struggle, especially if you are a bootstrapper and kind of early stage startup, how was it to receive and get your first paying customer?
Oh man, okay. So we've talked about getting on GitHub trending and maybe front page at Hacker News and getting Twitter blasted at a conference a little bit. Nothing, absolutely nothing beats the first paid customer. Like that bit of like validation is just unbelievable. Like it was a $50 payment, and for me personally, that covered everything infrastructure wise. Like I was so bare bones at the time that I think it was like $30 would have covered all the infrastructure I had leased. And so like I immediately, the first pay customer, I was like, I've gone from, red to black. Like I'm profitable today of $10. So let's go. Let's do it. Let's do this a few more times. Then maybe we can like actually do something really fun. Um, yeah, it was, I use Stripe, and so like had the like app on my phone, and to see that just like pop up, I think I was like brushing my teeth at the time, in the morning, and I was like, frothing at the mouth, like we did it, like I have a customer, yeah, right, we did it, it's here. Uh, yeah, yeah, it's unbelievable for sure. Yeah, I wish everybody could experience that at least one time, just one time.
It's funny. It's so different from on our first company. It was we bootstrap a CRM software for the insurance industry here in Israel. And the first insight I would say is never bootstrap a CRM software. It doesn't make any sense. It's like the biggest piece of technology you can ever write by yourself. Don't do it. But if you've already done that, so in that particular case, because the game basically we didn't know at the time, but now I do. It was basically it was a niche game of making a better product, a 10x product of what was available on the market. It took us less than I think like 3 months to get our first paying customer. Because yeah, it was extremely fast because the need was. I mean, this company right now holds like 30% of the market. We're not there anymore, but I mean, yeah, it took the market very quickly because the market was so ready for disruption. It was just unfunctional, basically. It's not just the product was good; the product was okay, maybe. It's just the market was really ready for disruption. Um, and so it took us 3 months, and it was very exciting. But I mean, to be frank, I've never felt this emotion of feeling, oh wow, it's so amazing. It's my first customer, because I think for me at the time, I was like, okay, yeah, but I mean, it's not enough for me to become profitable. I have 3 co-founders here. That's not going to fly. I need so much more. And it took the business a couple of good months up until, I mean, it took us like 6 months, maybe 8 months before we became profitable. And even then, I mean, talking about profitable, we took like 60% salary of what we could have taken as working basically as anything that is not a founder. So it wasn't like a good salary. It was just enough. Uh, yeah. Yeah. It took some time before the business became actually profitable to say, you know what, we're making we're making money, right? It's something. It took some time. It took a couple of years.
Does Browserless is an open core, I mean, kind of solution? I mean, is it kind of absolutely available, open, and accessible on GitHub, or there are some kind of private held? parts?
So everything that we host in our cloud is the same that we have on open source. So there really is no magic happening elsewhere, other repos. Um, I should say that, yeah, we are rebuilding everything from the ground up to sort of better handle these use cases that we've sort of seen over the last 5-ish years. So like if you're doing scraping, there's probably a good chance you want to proxy requests. That's just something that everybody does. And there's best practices. And a lot of those, yeah, and a lot of those we can do on our side. We don't have to tell you that now. Like Browserless today, we have to say, oh, do these things to proxy, do these things to get past certain bot things. But, like we've been able to reverse engineer it back to the Chrome CDP side, and we can do that for you. You don't have to do it yourself and keep up with it over time. So that's private right now, but eventually that'll be open core as well. So you can kind of see how that all works. And there's some just like cool, really nerdy ass things behind the scenes that we do as well. Like we have a TypeScript to JSON schema on the fly thing. So you can write everything in TypeScript, but then at like request time, it does it at runtime, validates like request post bodies. So there's like just some like really cool like nuts and bolts that I was like, this took so long to figure out, and I want to show people how to do this because it was a huge thorn in my side. So not even like web automation stuff, just like project, fundamentals. But yeah, everything else though is for sure. It's out there. It's on Docker Hub. You can grab it from there. Yeah, totally open.
And so I think it's one of the for commercial open source software. It's one of the big question of, as part of monetization strategy, am I going to be open source and then sell services and support? Am I going to be open source and sell the cloud offering with the addition of maybe some enterprise directories? Or am I going to be open core and have some sort of divergence between what I'm putting out there for the on the repo and then what I'm hosting and selling? So where are you really? I mean, it seems like a lot of things are out there and available. You do mention some of them are private. What is kind of the guidelines for you to say, that's that one I'm going to keep for myself to become like more private and open core, and what kind of gets to the open source part and say, what, I have to share that one. That one could never be private.
Yeah, that's a great question. Holy cow. I mean, I don't know if I have a hard and fast rule for like this goes open and this doesn't. It almost is, I think, a technicality limit at this point for me. Like, I would much rather have it in open source just so people can find it. And, you get a little bit of like a multiplication factor, like when it's in open source, right? Like if it's a cool secret, or something that's tricky or neat, it's nice to have it in open source because great, now you have a marketing motion there. Like, oh, go check it out, open source, here's how you do it. Now you got a blog. Now you got something you can put in a landing page. Now you've got it technical like demonstration of how, apt you are in this space or whatever, how good you are. But the new repository we're working on, there's just certain level of things that are just technically easier to do that like, oh, it'll take me 15 minutes to do it in the new repo. It'll take me 3 days to do it in the old repo just because it's so old and it's been around for so long. And so like one of the big things I wanted to do was like, I want to be able to change configuration of the server on the fly without having to restart the whole Docker container. And that was just wildly easier to do on a new repo than it was because like all of these stateful things in your app have it all like memorized at the start. Like, oh, a timeout is this value at the start, but it's in like 7 different places now. And so to like synchronize that change, you just have to go touch 7 files. Now there's a bunch of like CI stuff that needs to happen. I guess I'll say it's technical right now. The technical.
Before we will be wrapping this episode, I think that it will be kind of a bad thing or a shame not to mention that Prior to this recording, I talked to the other co-founder of Novo, to Dima, and he said that he heard about Browserless, and he actually got in touch with Pixel Point through you guys, because he saw the design and that it so catched his eye. And since then, we kind of not really, we are unseparated with them. And they are helping us with everything. So it's just interesting that even the design aspect and design manner as something that could be so beneficial and so unique, and even unite kind of unrelated things.
Yeah, it's funny because like the color design. So the terminal app I use is called Hyper, and it's like very pink and yellow and black and dark, and like that was kind of the genesis of the marketing website because it looks a lot like that app. And so, like there's a good, example of like, having something that speaks to developers, like even down to the color scheme, to a degree is matched with something that a developer tool would look like. But yeah.
Yeah, shout out to Pixel Point and to Alex, who was on SourceLife talking about design for open source libraries and companies. Um, and yeah, I mean, there's one other thing I would kind of, I know we need to wrap up in a couple of minutes, but I do want to ask that because I do feel it's one of the things we touched about, and this episode is mainly about bootstrapping in open source business and everything that comes next to it, but it wouldn't be complete without asking. And so, today Browserless is definitely a bigger player. You already generating revenue. You're a working business, and you have so much clearer understanding of your problem space and what's going on there than you used to have. Would you consider taking VC money today in order to move it extremely faster?
You know, yeah, so today for Browserless, I definitely would consider it just because like the amount of staff you need to get from like 1 million. So we just crossed a million ARR like a few weeks ago, which was a huge deal, unbelievable. Um, and so to go from 1 million to like 10 million, like it's a whole different ball game. And I think, yeah, some VC money would definitely help in that regard. Cause yeah, it's hiring, it's, finding events and conferences to host. And those all are very like capital intensive. Um, and yeah, I think for new businesses, if I ever stumble upon something good, yeah, like it definitely would help with certain things. It really depends on the business, to be honest. Like some things out there, I think you can still bootstrap and get some traction. And you probably should, to be honest, before you even talk to any VC funds, just because they want to see some sort of demonstrable product market fit. And what better way to do that to say like, hey, we've already got 1,000 users that are paying us. We just need to put more pedal to the metal or whatever to get this going. So, yeah, I was like anti VC for a long time, but now I'm starting to see why they're a thing, why it's important, and yeah, they're a critical component for sure.
So, Joel, I would love if you could maybe also give a short advice briefly to maybe founders, first-time founders, CEOs that are out there, that you think that could be really beneficial and help to, or go in the bootstrapping direction, or maybe considering the other things that you learned during your way. It could be a book, it could be anything that you may see fit.
Yeah, I think really the biggest, I mean, aside from, the nitty gritty, like technical details or the business details, is like really start like personally, like work on yourself and like finding like good Zen now moments. Like so much of what we do is hypothetical. It's in the future. It's stuff we made in the past that didn't work, but like learning to be content here and now is just a huge difference, for you mentally. Like mental health in this is really tough. And, you need to like see the beauty in just standard real life, normal life, and not get so emotionally tied up into it. Um, I wish there was like a prescriptive way of just like go do that. But for people, some people it's meditating. For people, it's being outside. For me, I like being in the water, so I love surfing, and that was like my relief was just like getting away from a computer, going surfing. Because yeah, like one day you'll have CodePen sign up, and the next day your number two customer cancels. Like that is a huge swing in emotions, just a wild swing. And if you can't like absorb both of those things at the same time and be okay, like it really isn't the job for you. For one, like be an engineer someplace and be happy and content with that. But if you really want to be dangerous and want to live that lifestyle, like yeah, find a way to like be happy and content. Yeah, I know it's kind of a kind of a weird piece of advice. There's so many books out there you could read. Yeah, I mean that's the biggest one I'd say because you know you'll believe if it works or if it won't. So just learn to like live with what you've got and kind of be content.
Love it, love it. Thank you so much, Joel, and thank you, Tomer, for joining this episode. I really enjoyed this conversation. I believe that our listeners will enjoy it and uh, find it beneficial as well. And thank you so much for being here.
Joel, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.